Hey everybody, Rayme here. I'm going to talk about some cool tech stuff today. So give me 1 second while I do a little sound check. All right. Perfect. Okay, hey everybody, how you doing today? So as promised, I talked on Tuesday night and I said what I'm going to talk about today is going to be, so there was this big research study. The topic that I want to talk about today is screen time and children. But the reason I want to talk about it is because there was this study done, and I saw people were posting this on Facebook and all over the place, basically everywhere. I mean, it's all over the news and everything. Like it's became a, if you want to get famous in publishing, you publish something like this, and it's like blown up everywhere. So the study itself is called Associations Between Screen-Based Media Use and Brain White Matter Integrity in Preschool Age Children. But basically, all the news headlines are like, the news headlines all pretty much say the same thing. It's like watching screens affects a child's brain development. Warning, parents. So, obviously, as a researcher and a professor, I like to, just because I hear something, I question every single thing anyone ever tells me about anything. I mean, literally, I question everything. I don't believe anything. I don't even believe what I say half the time. I got to go look that up. So I like to look everything up, especially when I know it's about a research study. So what I did is I went in and got the actual research study. It's ironic. I was able to pull up the full text the other day, but now I'm only able to pull up basically the findings, which tells me pretty much everything. And then I found a couple good articles which actually analyzed it. Well, now I had to analyze, so I went in and analyzed the study, and then I found some good articles that brought up basically all the same points I did. So I'm going to talk a little bit about them when I went in and looked at the study, because it's really important. Just because we hear something on the news and we see like research, we have to know like what does that really mean for me, and what does it really mean in general? Like how do we apply this across things? Because we have to be really careful with research. Sometimes bad studies are published. Sometimes studies are published and overblown. Sometimes studies are published and are really good. You have to be able to distinguish all of that stuff. So I want to go through this study and talk about what they did. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about the actual study itself and kind of go through some of the basic stuff so that you know where I'm coming from when I talk about my next points. Okay, so the first thing, basically what they did in this study, so let's talk about it. So they took 47 healthy pre-K kids, so kids between the ages of 3 and 5 years old is what they used. So 47 kids, and they compared them to see if their brains would change when they used screens. So basically what they did is they took these kids and they had their parents take a test. And basically what the test was, it's not a test, I shouldn't say test, it's a self-report survey. So basically the parents took a self-report survey, and what the self-report survey asked was questions like how long per day is your kid watching TV, playing like on some kind of screen, computer, tablet, whatever it is. Basically that's what they did, is they determined how long from the parents that their kid was on screen. And then what they did is they did an MRI of that child, and they compared the MRIs of those 47 kids against the self-report data that these parents gave them, and looked at the results to see if they could find any differences. Okay, so that's the main gist of the study. Let's talk about what they found, because I want to look at this objectively before I break it down with my own thoughts. Okay, so that was the gist of the study. That's what they did. Okay, you can see it's children 3 to 5. They had parents basically do it was called a screen Q survey. That was the self-report survey. They also had some cognitive testing as well, and that's when they did the MRIs. They did some cognitive testing, which cognitive testing means like how well their brain is functioning. Like, are they? What's their like? Not IQ, but you can think of it like that. Like, just think of it like that. It's easier to explain. Just thinking of it like that. They did the MRI and they had the parents do this screen Q survey about screen time. Okay. All right. So it says here, they had recruited 69 children, but they only were able to use 49. That's common in research. We generally, if you recruit 100 people, you might only be able to use 80 for various reasons. Like people just don't fit your criteria. All right. And basically, I can read all of these statistics, but let's just tell you the gist of what they say. The study found an association between increased screen-based media use compared with current guidelines. And basically lower integrity of the brain of certain brain matter called white matter, which they use to describe as language and literacy skills. So basically what they're trying to say here is that children who had an increased screen time also had lower language and literacy skills. So what they're trying to say is that the children who use the devices more tended to have lower language and literacy skills. Okay. And they recommend the findings suggest further study is needed, particularly at that age. Okay. So that's basically what their study found. That's what all the news articles basically wrote, what I just said. Now, what I just said is kind of scary. Like, that's that's pretty worrisome, right? Like, I mean, they tested these kids, they look how long they did screen time, and basically what they found is that kids who were on longer had these problems. Okay, now there are some big issues with this study. There aren't issues with the study itself. Well, that's not true. There actually are. There are some issues with the study, some things that should have been pointed out as major limitations, which were not. But the biggest issue is how this study is being interpreted. So first, let's start with the basics. So the basics are they only used 47 students. So 47 kids. So whenever you're doing a research study, especially one where you're trying to like compare groups or look at something across a spectrum, like when I think like across a spectrum like this, I start thinking of like regression and different kind of categorizing, and I would think in my head like I probably need to use like hundreds of participants. So they really had a very, very low sample. So that's like the first big issue, but they do mention that as a limitation in the study in their full paper. They mention that as a limitation, and I get that. And as they said, these are preliminary results. So they say that, these findings suggest further study is needed. They fully mention that they did not have a large N or sample size. So, I still think the study needs to be published, because even though if you have a low end, you find something interesting and hey, this needs to be explored more. I mean, that's what they're saying. But now let's get into the actual parts of the study. So I found this on Mashable, and it actually summed up a lot of what I thought of when I actually read through the study. So let's kind of talk about that. And they go through and they talk about like the stuff. So the first issue that they bring up here is that the problem with the Screen Q self-report survey that they did use was that it's based on the AAP guidelines, not necessarily by like anything else. So the way that the scoring is done in the survey is actually not necessarily based on like what I would picture as screen time. It's based on guidelines from the AAP, which isn't necessarily a good thing. It's nice that they tried to standardize it, but I would have liked to rather just see something else. I think there's better kind of self-report data that we could have gotten. Okay. Second thing they point out, the study was small. Okay. You know what? I give both of these things a pass right here. Yeah, I didn't like the tool. Is it reliable and valid? Well, it's valid enough that they tried to use something that's correct. Whether it's reliable or not, they don't report. The study was small, okay, but I can give them a pass on that because these are preliminary guidelines. But this is where we start to get into other things. So here's the big problem with this study. The methodology is completely flawed. That's the biggest problem. So the methodology is incorrect. It's not a bad, like, I look at it as like a pilot study to a bigger one, to the next one. So it's a flawed methodology, and the comparisons done were 100% incorrect. Let's talk about that. So let's talk about the methodology first. So how should this study have been done to show that this actually is a thing? Okay, so first thing they should have done. The only way to compare if screen time really has an effect on children, you have to do a before and after. So you have to do a before and after MRI. And in addition to that before and after MRI, you have to control for all the other factors that come into play. So let's talk about that. So first of all, why do you need to do this before and after? Well, you need to know like that you're not dealing with children that already have a problem, because those ones would have to be eliminated. So you do a before and after. The before, so you do that before MRI to know that there is stability across all of the kids you're actually going to measure, that they're all the same, right? There's no changes. We know what it is. And then we're going to do this after MRI to see what kind of changes happened. But we have to control for all the other factors or take them into consideration in our data. So what does that mean? Well, we know that certain things can impact a child's language and literacy between the ages of 3 to 5 significantly. So what you have to do is take out those kids or control for those kids who have all of those advantages. For example, if there's a kid in this study, let's say half the kids in the study, their parents read to them every single night with them. How much of a difference does that make? It makes a huge difference. In fact, they would completely skew the results of this study. And here's the problem. Since there's only 47 kids, you only need a handful of kids to actually skew the results of the study. That's the problem with only using 47. Because if you use like 500 kids and 1 or 2 kids do something crazy, it doesn't skew your results that much. But if you're only using 50, well, in this case 47, 5 kids, even 1 kid can really skew your results significantly. So you have to start controlling for those factors. But how do you control for it? That's in the self-report data. So, things like that can significantly improve or hurt a kid's language and literacy. One is a parent reading them every night. Next one, income. Well, because why? Because higher income families are not, they're nutritionally feeding their kids well. They're probably taking care of their kids better because they have the means to. Like they live in a nice neighborhood. The kids aren't scared. They're in a safe environment. The higher income parents will probably read more, and just things like that, which can make a significant difference. And it's not about you have to control for those things because they do make a difference, and you have to account for them. You have to account for our kids in single or double, like what kind of environment do they live in? Like, are they living in poverty? And that's what I mean by income, like high income. I don't mean like these kids are like multimillionaires. I mean, if a kid's living in poverty in a crime-ridden area that's not safe, that makes a big difference versus living in this, nice middle-class house in a safe neighborhood. So those kind of things can make a big difference on a child's development. We know they do. Research shows they do. So we didn't take that into account in this study. Now, they did try to take some of these things into account. And here's where it gets interesting. And here's kind of like the most interesting part of the study. When they accounted for income level, there was no difference. So they found a difference when they compared all these kids. But when they actually started adding in some of these variables that would make a difference, like a big one like income, guess what? There was no difference. Screens didn't make a difference all of a sudden. That's kind of disappointing that we see this result, they found an increased use of screen-based media when in their own study they specifically say when we added in income, we did not find a difference. So that's a little scary, because I think income makes a big difference. I think, as I pointed out, like that difference between household safety, parents reading, and all that kind of stuff. So you know I'm not saying this study is terrible and that it shouldn't have been published. I think that some of these conclusions are a little far-fetched, to say the least. And you can see right here, like, people commented, like, people are like, and these are medical doctors, like, screen Q is based on this. Where can we find details of the score? This person's interested. This person's interested in RF radiation and those effects. Well, I don't want to go there with this. Yeah, like, and here's the big problem. What was controlled for here? Like, couldn't this association be more about third factors that wouldn't exist in a home where a kid was in front of the TV all day? Like poverty, parental neglect, trauma. Like, they didn't control for those kind of things. And that's very problematic when you have such a small sample size like this. That's why you need like hundreds or thousands of people to do this. So it's very, 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 very difficult to talk about like the results of this study. Now, so that means like there's like a hype and scare factor with this study, that people are posting it and saying this is what happens when your kid is on screens, and it's not necessarily true. So I just want people to be careful when they're going to post research, talk about research. Make sure you really go and see like what happened and what is. Like, I wouldn't post this article on social media because I would be scared someone would take it literally. So I personally wouldn't post it. Now, if it was a strong study, I would definitely post it and say it. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this research study that was just released November 4th and has been talked about in the media, and people are posting everywhere. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. Keep it simple, talk about one thing, just that research study. That's it. Everybody have a good day. And obviously I'll be back Tuesday night, 7:30 p.m. I know I've been promising to play Fortnite with my son and stream that, so I'm gonna try to do that. Like, maybe this weekend we'll actually get it done. We were camping and I was sick last weekend. My voice is still not great from that, so just remember that. But I will definitely be on 7:30 Tuesday night. Have a good day, y'all.